Terri, I'm just so happy that you're here. I always invite people on who I respect, but you in particular, I like need more of you in my life. Your work is something that helps me find some sense of myself, some sense of power. And it's my biggest sticking point is what you address. So thank you for coming today.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having this forum so we can all help each other.
So can we start with how did this become your work? Why this topic? Why boundaries? Why codependency? Why helping people get healthy and find their way into the way we connect in a healthier way?
Well, I think that they say, you teach what you most need to learn. And for me, for sure, I was a boundary disaster in all of my 20s and probably some of my 30s. And I didn't realize that's what it was, though. I couldn't identify. I was in therapy, thank God. So I got into therapy when I was like 19, stopped drinking when I was 21. So that also created like an eyes wide open experience in life. But I was a high achieving people pleaser, helper type personality, pretty positive, like, kind of an optimist, but I was having conflict in my relationships and I was exhausted. And I was kind of young to be as exhausted as I felt. And so, why boundaries is that my long journey brought me back to understanding that that was what was missing is healthy boundaries, my ability to assert my boundaries. And the way that I identify this, because I also felt like it was confusing for so many people. After I got out of the world of entertainment, I became a psychotherapist. When I became a psychotherapist, by that point in my life, I was my mid 30s. I was like, oh, now I see it wasn't just me. This whole not knowing what a friggin' boundary is, that is an epidemic. All of my clients, and there was a real similarity of these are women who are running the world. So nobody would look at them and be like, oh, they're a hot mess, because that's not, they were not, and that's not how they were presenting. But the problems, no matter who they were, no matter what they were bringing into my office, I could connect those dots backwards to disordered boundaries and the inability to communicate effectively. That was the crux of the problem. So I simplified it for my work. I've been teaching this for many years. That's why I wrote a book about it. I simplified it to what are boundaries? What does it mean to have healthy boundaries? It means that you, Kathy, you listeners, know your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, right? Like the non negotiable things in your life. And you have the ability to communicate them effectively, transparently, with clarity when you so choose. So that sounds simple. And yet, when we really drill down to what that means, it means putting yourself first, right? It means knowing yourself and not, so much of the time we do what we do because we don't want to be rejected. We're fearful. So anyway, that was the longest way around the barn. I don't know if I even
No,
answered the question, but I
no,
think
you
you got it.
totally answered the
Oh,
question.
good.
And when you said it sounds simple, I was like, no, it sounds so hard.
Okay.
You said right before we started recording, you said there's a lot of human beings out there who are just highly functional codependents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I only realized I was that like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought being codependent means that you're a needy person. So you're dependent on other people. And I'm like, no, I go out of my way to never ask for anything that I need. And I'll do anything to set myself on fire to keep everybody warm.
Yep.
Oh, I'm completely dependent on everybody being okay so that I can function, so that my nervous system can relax.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I think I'm codependent. I only realized it literally like a year and a half ago. What do you what do you mean when you say high functioning codependent, and how can we identify if that's true? And then how can we kind of like walk our way through that?
Such a good question, and a great realization to have. When I started my practice and started seeing codependent behaviors in my clients, I noticed that there was this pattern where if I would say, oh, hey, what you're describing is a codependent response or whatever, if I said, I think you're suffering from codependency, every single client would be like, what are you, crazy? Hi, everyone's dependent on me, pal. I'm doing everything. I'm the go-to person. I'm the fixer. I'm making all the cash. I'm like, right. That's still codependency. But I realized, so I actually created this moniker, high functioning codependency, because that was my brand of codependency. And then it was what I was seeing over and over again with my clients. So I'll give you my definition of what it is. It is being overly invested in the feeling states, the decisions, the outcomes, and the circumstances of the people in your life to the detriment of your internal peace, maybe your physical well being, your financial well being. So it's at the expense of something, because you'll always have people listening being like, well, of course I'm invested. Well, of course you are, because you're a lover. So, right, we're all invested, but it has to be to the detriment of something. So if you're listening and you're like, I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm going to give you a way that you can tell, where I'm going to ask you to check your urgency. So if something happens to your partner, your sister, your best friend, they're in a situation, how urgent does that situation become to you? Does it suddenly feel like it's happening to you? It's yours to figure out, to fix, start making suggestions, start Googling, start doing things because there is an urgency, a compulsion to fix what's happening for the other person. That's codependency, right? That is actually codependency. And there's more, because when you think about, we don't usually think about this, but what you just said, Kath, is the truth, that codependency is overt or covert bids for control. We don't want our best friend making that terrible mistake by going out with that idiot. We don't want our kids grown little to do things that will make them be in pain. We don't want our spouse or our partner to fail. Right? So it's like we're doing everything, but that is a disordered boundary emotionally. And there's such a high cost, which we can get into, and then I can talk about ways that you can identify it and perhaps start to step back. But we really have to look at the cost of this, because I felt like with my clients, it's almost like they thought that, I thought when I was doing it that it was love. Like I literally thought I was expressing love to my sisters and whoever I was doing this with, which was literally friggin' everybody. Like I was not discerning at all. It wasn't just the close people in my life. I would be, giving advice to my mail carrier and the fucking barista at, you know what I mean? Like I really could become, I think, codependent with anyone or feel overly responsible, because really when we think about it, it's feeling overly responsible, being over functioning, which comes with this high capability. Like you can do it. So imagine it's like, they say about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. It's like high functioning codependents are like Ginger Rogers. They're doing everything Fred Astaire was doing except backwards and in heels, where people look and they're like, so smooth, so graceful, like you've got it all together. You're the person that I come to. But most of the time, and I've literally never seen it not be the case, we're doing this at the expense of ourselves. Right? That makes sense?
It makes complete sense. And I'm extremely transparent with my audience, but we've talked about pieces of this, but I just want to like lay it out there for everybody how hard this hits me. I also became the breadwinner when my career blew up, right? And I have 3 children and I have 3 daughters, and I'm the one making the plans for the horseback riding, as well as like the cool like mindfulness class they're going to take, as well as trying to help my husband do his like passion projects and paying for the entire like every adventure possible, on top of like holding a mission that I'm setting out to do, not just a job, but life's really intentional life's work. And I had Danielle Laporte here a little while ago, and she said, what's scary is I identify with some of what you do, and people will say to you, you're crushing it. That is amazing. And if you were an addict of another kind, people would say, I feel concern. I'd love to be available if you need to process, or no, in your case, you are crushing it. And I have this little dirty secret, which is I find myself in between 17-hour long days of work and then helping with the kids and then holding for my family and then being the one who hosts every dinner at Mother's Day, everything, takes care of, holds for everyone. There is like, I have the dirty secret of like being in between a call and I'm in the kitchen and I'm shaking because there is nothing for me. I'm completely abandoning myself all the time. And then I have this lovely tape of like, I have to do it all. I have to do it all. And poor, my husband's always like, no, you don't. You keep choosing this. You choose it, you choose it, you choose it. But when I tell you, Terri, and I don't know if anybody's listening can agree or can relate, the amount of discomfort I would feel to put any of these balls down, it is so massive, so massively uncomfortable from a place of they would be uncomfortable. Like, how could I allow them to tolerate me all of a sudden not being the one to hold this? And so I will make decisions based on not wanting anyone to be sad or uncomfortable. I'll be talking to someone for 3 hours. I won't get up to pee if I think I might interrupt them because they're speaking.
That is extreme codependency, babe, which you know,
Yeah.
which is what we're talking about.
But I've never heard it this way because I'm always like, look at me crushing life. Like, look at my business. Look how much money I'm able to make. Look how many cool things I'm able to write books and I do things and I have fancy friends and like never would think barely hanging on by a string.
Oh, without a doubt. And what I see though, Kath, first of all, thank you for sharing all that. And I see you and I know you and I know where you are. No. I do, because it's like something will happen in life because you will not. I hope that this moment, this conversation we're having today is going to be a pivot point for you. And I'm totally invested in that being true, because something will happen. You can't do this forever. And the bottom line is, women would come to me sometimes 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th decade of life and being like, what the hell? Like, I've done it all. Got all the money, got all the family, got all the kids, did the thing. Kids are on track. Money's in the bank. My spouse is fine. I go to soul psych 3 times a week. I have friends. Why? I thought, I don't know. Is this all there is? Like, actually, is this all there is in life? And when you're checking boxes and when you're being driven, which high functioning codependency, we're really being driven by fear. And yes, self-abandonment, but fear is really the big thing. Like, we think it's love, but it's not. It really isn't. Doesn't mean you don't love those people. Doesn't mean I don't love my people. But the driving ourselves to insanity, that's driven by fear. And the reality is, you don't want to be in the 7th decade of your life saying, I've checked all the right boxes, I've done all the right things. Why do I feel so friggin' empty and resentful? Because here's the thing, not you, Kathy, nobody is powerful enough to stop the process from playing out the way it's going to play out. You don't think that these older women who are martyrs are like, can't wait to become a martyr, right? No, they become martyrs because they overgive and overfunction and self-abandon and are last on their own list for decades. And then suddenly they're like, you know who owes me? All of you people. After everything I've done for you, I can't believe you're going to move away. Like, it twists up your relationships. It also makes people not know you because you're not Superwoman, even though you're amazing. And none of us are. And so this need to perform and this need to fill the gap. And listen, I'm looking at you because I was you. So there's no judgment whatsoever, ever. But that need, I'm going to tell you a quick story about what shifted this for me. I was in my late 20s by this point, and I was already friggin' exhausted. And I was talking to my therapist and I was bawling my eyes out. One of my sisters always seemed to be in a bad, I have a bunch of sisters, always seemed to be in a bad relationship, some abusive stuff, addiction. So I was crying to my therapist and being like, I've done everything. I don't know what I'm going to do. She's living with this crack addict in the middle of the woods with no running water. That was a true story. And the person is abusive. It was all this stuff. So I would talk to her, and then I would cry hysterically, my poor husband, my everybody. And my therapist said, I'd sent money, you do all the things. And this is not the first relationship where I was choosing to do those things. But I didn't understand it was such a compulsion. So my therapist said, let me ask you something, Tara. What makes you think you know what Jenna needs to learn in this life on her life journey? And I was like, well, I think we can all agree she doesn't need to learn it in a friggin' house in the woods with a crackhead who beats her, do we? And she's like, no, I definitely can't agree because I have no idea. But do you know what's happening for you? And I was like, clearly I don't. So could you clue me in? And she said, Tara, you've worked for decades to create some sense of internal peace or harmony. She's like, your sister's dumpster fire of a life is really messing with that peace. So, yes, of course, you love her, but you would like her life to stop ruining your peace. And I was like, wow. And she's like, but it's not your thing to fix. And you think you're helping, but really you're probably impeding the process. She's got to reach a certain place in her own life. And you don't have to let her talk to you about this abusive relationship she's in, because I couldn't tolerate that, which I see. It was so painful for me to tolerate her pain. And so I didn't realize I was allowing her to like call and dump, like toxically dump on me. I'd be like, do this. And I Googled this and I sent you a book and whatever. And so she'd get off the phone and feel lighter. And I'd get off the phone and feel like someone just poured toxic waste down my throat and then be sick for like days about what was going on in her life. And I said to my therapist, okay, but I want to understand this. I felt like I had to do everything to be a good sister. Don't I have to do everything? And she's like, Terry, but what you're trying to do is not on your side of the street. Like it's not yours to do. And really think about what you're doing. It's this, you want to control what's happening in her life and you can't. And I was like, okay, so what do I do? Am I just going to be like, bye? And she said, no. She said, you don't have to. So what we ended up doing is I ended up saying to my sister, hey, I love you, and talking to you about this idiot that you're living with is too painful. So just know that I'm going to step back. But if and when you're ever actually ready to get out of this horrible situation, I'm still your person. 9 months later, I only talked to her a few times in those 9 months. 9 months later, she called me up and she's like, I'm ready. I was like, fantastic, getting in my car. And that was decades. That was a long time ago. She got sober. With my husband and I helped her. We had this little lake house that we winterized so she could stay there while she was going to school. She became a nurse's, all the things. Would she have done that anyway, Kath? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that the moment I got the memo and really got it, that what I was trying to do was impossible and that it wasn't what was best for the other person because I do not know what is best for my sister on her life journey. There was such a relief of letting myself off the hook. That was the real thing. I couldn't believe I wasn't responsible for it. But then I got it and I was like, wow, this is not the only relationship you're doing this in, Terry. You feel responsible for every human being who crosses your path. And you're not. So now let's look at the secondary gain of staying in that high functioning codependent position, right? There's stuff that we get out of doing it, not just because we're capable and it feels good to help others. A lot of times we just are helpers by nature, right? I just love to help a sister out. I love to help whoever. So that's one thing, is we get to feel good about ourselves. But what ends up happening is that we also feel resentful. We also feel put upon. We volunteer to do things, and then in our minds, we're like, yeah, Betty's entitled. It happens, even if you don't think it is, but it is. And it is a disordered boundary. And what is the cost of that? Is the bandwidth that you need to take care of yourself, your life, figure out what are my preferences, my desires, my needs, my limits, my deal breakers. What are those things? That takes time. It can't just be my preference is no conflict, right? Because that was my preference for a really long time. I was like, just nobody be mad. Okay. Can that just be how it goes? Whatever I need to do to ensure that no one is mad. But all of that, like you were saying before, really includes the self-abandoning.
Oh my God, it's just so beautiful and so true. I have a friend who her daughter was a drug addict, and she used to come home smashed and just crash on her mom's, floor. And she'd always keep finding herself out of a job and stay with her mom. And they lived in Buffalo, New York. It's quite cold there in the winter. And her therapist said to her, if you really want to help your daughter, change the lock. And she told me the story that happened upon one winter night, and her daughter was trying to get in and couldn't. And her mom, my friend, was standing on the inside in the foyer sobbing.
Oh, yeah.
And she was, Mom, Mom. And then she started screaming, Mom, what the hell? Mom, and she's freezing. And she was sobbing and shaking and just didn't open the door, just did not open the door. And her daughter was out there for like 3 hours until it was just so bitter cold. And she checked herself into a rehab because there was nowhere to go. She was like smashed out of her mind. She didn't have any money. There was literally nowhere else to go. And so her daughter now sober, she's been sober like 11 years. She's got 2 children. And she said, that must have been so much harder for you than for me. Isn't that, it's really the story that you also told in your own way. But this idea of like self-abandonment, like you were saying, I mean, God, we do it all day long in so many little ways. I listen to my audience say things like, well, who would I be to actually like charge for what I do? I'll just forget it. I'll just give it. I'll volunteer at the church. I'll do it for my daughter's school. I'm not going to charge. Like this feeling of, I just would rather like not make anyone uncomfortable. What is the actual cost? So now you have belonging, but do you really belong to yourself even at that point? No. Who do you belong
Probably
to?
not.
Nobody.
Well, it's like this whole thing. Like, look at the way that we were socialized. It's not even, I mean, listen, yes, your family of origin, but there's a reality. If you were raised as a woman in North America, Europe, anywhere, this is like, be nice above all other things.
Be nice.
Be a good girl. Turn that frown around. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I mean, I could keep going. I won't. But we were raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents.
Be
We were
accommodating.
trained.
Be accommodating. Be pleasing.
Be pleasing.
Yeah.
Don't be a drama queen. Don't stir the pot. Don't be a troublemaker. Which really translates to, that is the most important thing. Not how you feel, not what you think. It's like, where's my happy girl, right? Like, well, what if I'm bawling my face off and I'm sad? I guess that girl will be rejected.
Yeah.
So we learn to hide, to suppress emotions, to shove it down, to put on a brave face, to all the things. But how can we ever bring our greatness, like what we're, first of all, let's start with, how can anyone authentically love us if we never let them authentically know us? And when we are dancing backwards in high heels, people don't know us. We're saying yes when we want to say no. We're doing things that we don't want to do out of fear. We're being driven by our need to control. And the reality is, people don't know us. I was so angry before I got healthy with my boundaries and before my therapy really kicked in, like late 20s, early 30s. I was really like becoming like a full-blown martyr, where I became like this weird bean counter where I was like, I can't believe she would say that when I've done X, Y, and Z for her. In my mind, of course, I was way too crafty to ever say that out loud. But I was like, look at who you're becoming. Do it because you want to, or don't. But you cannot think that doing these things makes people owe you, because, wow, then your motivation is wrong. And it's really you thinking, because when you think about what this really boils down to, it was so humbling to really grasp that I thought I knew what was best for everyone. My sisters, my friends, any boyfriends, like I knew what they should be doing, all as a way to avoid myself, my own life, my own conflicts, what I needed to be working on. But I was going to fix this. And it was like a high. It was like getting, you get a hit of a high because people are like, you're amazing and you just changed my life and you did this and you did that. And you're like, yeah, just all I want to do is work, you know?
Yeah. For me it's interesting. I don't feel it in the form of like resentment, except for when it comes all onto my husband. Like all these people, I'm like, I almost feel it's like it's the least I can do. This is my role. This was my role in the family growing up. Dad left, mom was suicidal, sister had a really hard time with it. Kathy was the happy, the fixer, got it. My work, that's what I'm like the favorite friend of all the friends. They come to me, they get the talk, it's all good. And then it all comes down to, but this guy in my house, boy, does like he not show up. Boy, does he do this. Boy, does he do that. And then he's literally like always trying to say, how can I help? What I'm like, you don't do this. You don't do this. It's like all of it gets
Mm-hmm.
piled on. Like, can't you see I'm drowning? Why don't you come out from yourself and like save me? It's like, no, that's not your job. Like, how codependent is that? And that's such a form of suffering that I'm addicted to, which I'd love to stop. My question to you, and for anyone who's listening who can relate, might have this question. So, what do we do about it? Right? Like, I think anyone at this point who's listening, there's probably one thing we've said that you might be able to relate to. So if that's the case, how, when it's seriously, Terri, I feel like so many of us don't even answer the phone because we have a hard time even getting off. Like to the tiniest minutia, how do we
Mm-hmm.
begin to even like be brave enough to take like small steps forward?
Well, one thing is I created a GIF for your audience. So we'll start with that. It's codependency and boundaries. So that'll be easy enough.
We will put the link to that in the show notes. So what can you tell us about that next little step towards being healthier?
The first thing you have to have is the awareness. So part of this conversation, Kat, that we're having right now, hopefully is raising awareness for the people listening. But then we got to look at our lives and go, okay, so what is the deal? Am I saying yes when I want to say no? Right. So let's just say that's the first thing that we're going to look at. Just feeling like you can't say no, just feeling compelled to say yes. And I feel like a lot of us are people pleasers or seeking validation outside of ourselves or too afraid to let other people down. So it might be too threatening to just start saying no when you really feel like it. So I always say everything that I teach, we do it super gradually, just baby steps. So the first thing is for the next 7 days, no insta yeses. No matter who asks you what, unless it has to do with a kid or your house is on fire, there will be no instant agreement to anything. You're going to start to bring into your vernacular stuff like, oh, hey, thanks for thinking of me. I need to check with my partner, my roommate, my dog, whatever. Um, I'm not sure. I have to check my schedule, but I'll get back to you. I have a 24-hour decision making policy. So I want to think about it. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
I love that.
Like just build it into your life because what ends up happening is that we think other people or we allow other people to a degree to create these timelines. And because when you're very high functioning, a lot of times there's an urgency. We just want to get things done. People get in touch with us, we get back to them. Right? We're just like banging things out that we don't give ourselves the luxury of time. So when you do that, let's say you do it for the next 5 or 7 days, you're going to see how that feels. So you're going to take a couple of those things that I said and just have them right in your hip pocket. Be mindful. Nobody needs an immediate answer from you. So much of this work around boundaries is about slowing down because we must slow down meditation, mindfulness practices, breathing, so that there's space to respond instead of react. And when we have our plates so full and we're so busy and so many balls in the air, like you said, there's no room to take a break, to think. And it's so much easier to go back and say no to something that you've either said a half a no, right? You've almost already said no, but you don't have to, right? But at least you have not committed. So that's going to be the first step. But the real thing is we have to look at the secondary gain. So that is the unobvious gain that we get by overfunctioning in our life. So there's obvious gains we could look at and go, oh, okay, people think you're great. People love you. There's a lot of devotion and loyalty that come from being the go-to person for others. I know this because this was my life. But to figure out the secondary gain, I'm going to give you guys a question or two that you can ask yourself anytime you're stuck anywhere. So it's not just here. You can use this when you're like, how could I be in this kind of a relationship again? Or how could I have spent all my money again? Or whatever. Because it could be any behavior that you don't like, whether it's your own or it's an interaction with someone else. I promise you, there is some unconscious something that's driving it. So the question is this: what do I get to not face, not feel, or not experience by staying stuck here or by continuing this behavior? So if you would ask yourself, Kath, we're talking about overfunctioning and being all the things for all the people, what comes up for you? If you just ask, hey, what do I get to not face, not feel, and not experience?
So good.
So think.
Are you
What?
asking me?
Yes.
Well, what comes up is I don't have to tolerate how uncomfortable it is if somebody gets mad or was to like abandon the relationship, or it's almost, for me, the worst part is like they're mad at me.
Okay.
Something about somebody being upset with me is so uncomfortable. It's so hard to tolerate it.
Yep.
That I don't just want to be like, they're not mad. I want them to be like, oh my God, she went above and beyond. Did you see what she did for my birthday? She didn't just get me a gift. She got me 9 gifts. She decorated the whole house.
Yep.
She hired that dancing waitress flamingo girl. Like, it's like, oh, I will, like, yeah. And there's also a shame. There's something that feels so uncomfortable. And I know that people feel this way too, because I watch it happening all the time. If somebody's going to give to me, ooh, like, I have to give back not equal, but more, so that I don't have to tolerate any of that gap between what I feel comfortable receiving and what they gave.
Right. But here's the thing. All of that stuff, disordered boundaries, which but it also blocks intimacy. So when I first met my husband, I was
Ooh,
such a
that's so
control
good.
freak. Oh my God, so true. It's so true. Blocks intimacy. So when I first met my husband, I was single, living in Manhattan. He was living in Jersey. He would always want to do these nice things for me, right? Like, I'm going to come pick you up. And even though I was like, how does that make sense that you're going to pick me up? I could get on a train. It would only take 20 minutes, Or he's like, I want to do this. I'll go get the tickets so you don't have to wait in the rain. And I was like, my mother said to me, Terry, I have a question. Why are you denying Vic the pleasure that it gives him to do things for you? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, he doesn't have to do those things. Cause I felt like I don't want to owe him. I don't want to feel like a burden. I don't want him to think that I'm greedy or selfish. It also, to me, doesn't make sense. That isn't efficient. Why would you drive all the way from New Jersey to pick me up to go back? Because he used to always say, like, I'll scoop you up. Which, of course, after this conversation with my mother, I started letting him. But she was like, Tara, let me tell you something. If you keep rejecting his offers, the offers will stop coming. And you will end up like me, doing everything for yourself, by yourself. I was like, oh, I don't want that. Okay.
I have never put those two things together. It literally just brought tears to my eyes. The idea that one of these things that you might call a secondary gain, you've been using that phrase, is it keeps away another person. It's the now
Mhm.
they're we forfeit having intimacy, because you're reminded when my husband and I got engaged, we got engaged in September, we got married a few months later, and my car lease was up in October. And so he went with me to look at getting a new car. And I walk in and I'm like, okay. And he's like, and we might have a kid over the next several years. You're going to have this next car. Let's look at it together. Let's make this bit, maybe this is a good idea to have a bigger, whatever, SUV. Okay, fine. So then he says, why don't you let me talk to the sales guy? Just because I want to be like the bad cop and you could be the good cop. And I go out and I come back in and he hands me the key. And we're engaged. And he's like, it's done. And I said, okay, great. So now I'm going to pay for it. And he's like, I just bought it for you. And I was so upset. I was so upset with him. I was sobbing. I was like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Please don't do that. That's not okay. You did that without asking me. And he's like, we're getting married. Why are you making me feel so uncomfortable? I did it. I think I did the right thing. It's our, I want to help, why should you have. And I was literally sobbing to the point where there was snot coming out of my face. I was like, you need to take it back. You need to take it back. And he was like, I didn't sleep that whole next night. 2 days later, he was like, what's happening?
Right.
Why was that the reaction? And I'll never forget it, So think of every other thing that's happened since.
Mm-hmm.
You could just kind of picture what my response is. And I never equated it with, maybe I don't want anyone that close to me. Maybe it's a way for, and I never equate that. Oh, I get to opt out of so much intimacy, because there is something around receiving. It's so hard. It can be the feeling of unworthiness or shame that you then have to tolerate is so uncomfortable. You'd rather just be in your zone of comfort where it's I don't have to tolerate reminding myself that I feel shame or unworthy, or now I have to trust you more. And who wants to do that? Right. So I'll just got it. I got it.
Yep.
It's this is why I wanted to have you on. How many of you listening? I mean, I know who's listening, high functioning, amazing women who take everything on. So what other conversation should we be having? So then how do we, I guess, become comfortable with having intimacy with human beings, relying on in a healthy way, letting people give to us,
mm-hmm.
and having a different relationship with that, feeling safe around that, being able to come in and out and not feel swallowed up, or not feel all of a sudden owned by someone, or not feel all of a sudden whatever the 19 things are that make you afraid of intimacy. How can we rewire that?
Well, you're not going to do that in a podcast, but you can look at, this is the way that you've been relating. And you've mentioned a couple of times in this time we've been yakking about how uncomfortable things make you feel. Here's the thing with being uncomfortable. You're not that fragile, man. And neither is any person listening. And it's worth it to allow yourself to be uncomfortable for a healthier, more expansive life where you can restore, where you self-nurture, where you allow others to nurture. Because what ends up happening is we get into these relationships where even if, when you're an overfunctioner, even if you got into a relationship with someone who functioned just fine, we can overfunction them into underfunctioning.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, totally.
Fact. Where they would have been fine until you're like, no, I got it. Or you're not doing it right. One or the other, or both. Could be all of it. I don't want it done that way. Forget it. It's easier if I do it myself. Before you know it, people are afraid to do anything. I have a close friend who's her whole family is terrified of her and doesn't want to do anything wrong. And she's like, well, it's my birthday, so I guess I'm planning something. I'm like, yeah, because they're all afraid to do anything because you hate surprises and you hate everything. So you're planning your own thing. She's like, oh, so he's telling me there's the money and I could do the thing. I'm like, right. And if he got you something without talking to you about it, would that have worked? She's like, all right, fair point. No, it would not have. I was like, right. So we can't have it all ways, I think that what's important is looking at what are we so afraid of with the control stuff, healing this codependency piece, allowing the chips to fall where they may. It is not for you to make sure that no chips fall. It's you have to deal with what is on your side of the street. Every person listening has to really drill down to what is my responsibility? Oh, I'm on a work team and Betty never does what she's supposed to do. And I always pick up the slack for Betty. Now Betty expects me to pick up the slack for Betty. And I really can't stand Betty anymore. Like we put ourselves in these positions because we can't deal with the idea of Betty failing or being called on the carpet or getting into trouble. And yet you are not the boss of Betty. And you're barely the boss of you because you're actually being driven. If this is your behavior, at least that was my behavior. I wasn't really the boss of me. Who was driving me was my fear mind, my ego mind. I was so afraid to be rejected, so afraid to be, I mean, what you were saying, Kath, I was so identified with about like not just over functioning, but like over delivering to like the stupid degree where my whole thing was, and I think this is a lot with high functioning codependence, is about being above reproach. It's like, it's not enough to just be a great student. It's not enough to be, you're the best student. It's not enough to, it's going to be, I have to be, when I was younger, it had to be the level where people are like, no, you are the one, the high and mighty, the most important to me, above and beyond. I couldn't have done it without you. And I remember saying to my therapist back in the day, I was like, how much like adoration does one human being need? And even that doesn't make me feel secure or worthy enough. So what is it? And I remember with my husband, because I'd had a lot of therapy before we got together and he'd had a lot of therapy. So, we've been together 25 years and it is a very good union. But again, would it be if we hadn't had all that therapy? Probably not. And I remember after the thing with my mom telling me to like let him do things for me, that for the first time, probably in my adult life, when I started really realizing that he was a trustworthy person and that it was okay to let him get close and that he was who I thought he was, it was like I exhaled for the first time in my entire life is what it felt like. And I still would get moments, once I believed that he wasn't going to betray me in some way, then I had like a whole year where I was like, he's definitely going to get run over by a bus. Like for sure, he's going to die. And then what am I going to do? I don't know. But like, as soon as I believed he wouldn't leave me, then I was like, but he's still going to somehow be taken away.
Of course,
Which
upper limit right there. Yeah.
exactly. So awareness is step one. You're going to do kind of an inventory in the downloadable gift that I gave you. That you guys can find it on the boundaryboss.me/dream job is where you can find the download. That's the beginning, is you have to assess, how is this coming out for you? And do you want to change? So it isn't about talking to other people in our lives like, hey, world, get a megaphone and be like, everything is going to change. We're not doing that. It's going in and really probably the most profound thing you can do right now, people listening, is do a resentment inventory. Where are you feeling it? Whether you say it or not, where do you feel overtaxed, underappreciated? Where do you feel pissed, like resentful of like, why do other people allow me to do all of these things, quote unquote, or expect me or feel entitled? And here's the thing, we have to change our dances. We're talking about family of origin. We have all of these boundary dances we've been doing for a long time. And of course, the boundary troop that you've danced with the longest, which is your family of origin, can be the hardest one to change, but you can. And so stepping back, and it doesn't matter what other people's situation isn't your situation anymore. And who gets screwed when we still have this loyalty to family of origin to this degree, because I had the exact same situation. Who you're really shortchanging is your family, and certainly yourself. Your now family. I call your family now your first family, because as soon as you get married, that person becomes your family. Your family that you grew up in becomes your family of origin. So the people who need to be prioritized in our life, my 2 cents on it is our family, which is partner, children, if we have those, and then family of origin. And the split loyalty when we have dysfunctional upbringings, which PS pretty much everyone did, is that it's very difficult to decide where to put our energy if we still have family of origin stuff going on. And yet you have a right to have your primary loyalty and consideration be to your family, and family of origin is second. But if you and like me, if you are the hero child, then that becomes way more problematic because the sense of responsibility is so deeply
Oh yeah.
ingrained, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And my husband and I both have that story. His mom recently passed away from cancer, which is
I'm
very
sorry.
sad. May her soul have, only good blessing for all eternity. But she just recently passed, like in the last 2 months. And she was a widow his entire life, basically, since he's a kid. So it's very new that he feels released of that being a priority.
Yep.
And we both very much did that same dance. And so it's interesting because I pointed the finger so much at him, only to realize, oh my God, like there's so much going on my side of the street.
Yep.
And what you just said, everything you've just said is just it's so important. Where can we follow along with your work? Where can we read and discover and take part in any of the ways in which you're continuing to teach us and help us and guide us?
All right. So, well, you can follow me on social, which is I'm just at Terri Cole. Mostly I hang out on Instagram, but I also have a really beautiful community on Facebook for anyone who's still there with about, I don't know, 28,000 or 30,000 women, where it's just women in this group. It's called Real Love Revolution with Terri Cole. And that's free. And we just do inspirational stuff there. I have a course on boundaries that is coming out in October, where I walk you through. It's an 8-week process. You can get the book if you haven't read the book. If you want to read the book, you can get it at boundarybossbook.com, where I have a ton of bonuses for you. And if you're interested in Boundary Bootcamp, there's a wait list, which you can get to at terricole.com/BB 2021. Yeah,
Oh my God,
that's
I'm
it.
so in that course. You
Oh, yes,
guys,
please.
I will, first of all, it has to happen. I've been following your work and your book and I've taken so many screenshots of things that you post on Instagram just to have them as like wallpaper in my phone. Um, and then if possible, maybe we'll even come October, like either we can have you back or I can mention it. Cause this is just, it really is the most important thing. Like everything that we talk about, you guys, on this show, where we talk about like claiming the magic that's inside of you and building something that feels like your life's work, what always comes up, Terri, that I always say is it's not a business problem you have. It's a courage problem of some kind. It's, I don't know what people will think of me. It's, I don't know if I'm going to get rejected. I don't want to
Yep.
ask to be paid, right? I said that one before.
Yes.
Unless we are able to get healthy in these ways,
Mhm.
it's extremely difficult to navigate all of the ins and outs.
It
So,
is, but we can do it together. Kath, it's like there's something so powerful about the like-minded, like-hearted folks coming together. And I'm so grateful and happy to be able to lead people on this journey towards real liberation, towards real authenticity, because it's tired. If we do this, we can't do it forever. You'll end up getting sick. We end up getting sick. I ended up getting cancer. Like there's a whole, it's not free. Do you know what I mean? I'm fine now, but I'm just saying, I knew that the level of
oh yeah.
you just can't. You just can't.
Before we sign off, can you tell us one positive thing that you've seen in your community, where like an example of, like, it could even be the simplest example, but how you've actually seen somebody get to the other side of this?
Oh, I have
I
thousands,
know,
but
but I
okay, let me
thought like
think.
it'd
Let me
be
think. Hold
cool to
on.
hear,
Yeah.
like, if it's something she said to her boss or a way that she changed her life or any one little nugget, just to keep us ending on a possibility note.
Well, I was just doing, I literally just had a live today with one of my courses. And we were talking about boundaries. And someone had been preparing to talk to her sister. They talk once a week, but the sister always wants to talk way longer than my person wants to talk. And she was concerned about telling her, but she wanted to. She loved their talks. They're just too long. She just doesn't want to talk as long. So she, I have a whole way that I walk you through a proactive boundary success plan. So you get the language, the thing. And she just said to her, says, hey, I love our talks, right? We start with something positive. And I really think because it's Sunday night and I got to work Monday, I would love it if we could just keep it to 30 minutes so that I get better sleep. And her sister was like, right on, no problem. And then when they spoke the Sunday after, the sister was like, hey, you better finish that story because there's 2 minutes left and we can pick it up next Sunday. Like, and what my client was saying was how loved she felt
100%.
by her sister being like, not only was the sister not mad, the sister's like, oh, that's your preference and you don't want to be tired. I love you and I don't want you to be tired.
Beautiful. It's
Just
beautiful.
gorge,
It's so beautiful. And you're right. Like all of this gives us an opportunity to actually have intimacy and real relationships with the people we have in our life. And so give them a chance to actually know who we really are. And it's all just so beautiful and important. And I'm so impressed with you. Thank you so much for being here today. The
It was
best.
so much fun, Kat. Let's do it again.
I would love it. Terri, that was amazing. You are so gifted at this. I'm definitely going to do the course and I'll tell everybody to do it.
Please do. And then we can, if you get a whole group of people to do it, then I'll do something in your group. You know what I mean? Like we can do like a special little something, something
Oh
for
my
your
God.
people.
I would love, love, love it. I'm such a big fan in the most earnest way. So if I can keep supporting you, then I'm one of those people now.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. This was really great. It was super easy. And I think people are going to find it very compelling because you're
Yeah,
so
because
honest, which I love.
when you're so you're like everyone's instant best friend. Like you're like Kath, like you call me Kath. Like there's like a warmth to you. It's unusual and rare and refreshing. And thank you.